we will be discussing the indiscriminate tech layoffs that we have experienced in recent times. And we so happen to have unsuspecting Mousa here to speak for all of tech leadership across the world. You would want to
I feel bad for tech leadership across the world, Newton, if I'm speaking for them, but thank you so much for having me today.
We have seen roughly 24,401 tech employees that have been laid off by 92 tech companies just within this year alone. Okay. So at number one, since the COVID began, we have Amazon, which has laid off 27,840 employees, right? Wow. Followed closely with your guess, Meta, that has laid off 24,600 employees. In third place is Intel, the chip giant. Yeah, they've laid off 16,115 people, individuals. We have Microsoft next with 14,700, followed by Tesla, then Google.
Think about which teams are really being decimated the most within technology, right? It's low to mid-level engineers. It's a lot of customer success, right? It's a lot of product managers, technical writers. I see a lot of product managers out on LinkedIn saying that they're struggling to find work. What I make of it is there's an irresponsibility on the part of these tech companies that when times are good, they overscale and they overpay, right? And then when times are bad, they seesaw back the other way. And for those of us that have chosen to get into technology, we're kind of at the whim of what's happening. Unfortunately now, economic climate being what it is, and also the rise of AI and the ability to automate a lot of these functions. And it's not just about eliminating human capital. It's about eliminating resources that human capital uses. Because when companies come in to try to make those cuts to achieve certain numbers and goals and targets, they're looking at everything. I mean, man, down to the snacks, right? Down to the type of snacks and the food that get bought for the office. I kid you not. I've had these conversations. And so you want to talk about how you differentiate yourself, how you think about safeguarding your career as much as possible. If you choose to enter the machine of big tech, you have to set yourself apart in a way, because there's going to be a lot of these types of roles that are going to show up as line items on a spreadsheet. You can't dismiss anyone, and good value comes from everyone. And so just have those conversations, meet with people, talk with people, because you see it if you're scrolling on LinkedIn, like many of us do from time to time, the horror stories about I've applied to 1,000 jobs in the last year and I barely hear back from anyone. That's not how we find jobs anymore. Jobs are found on a human connection basis. They're found on a referral basis. People want to talk to people that are known, and they want to talk to somebody that they have a connection with, even if it's via a second or third party.
Hello and welcome back. Today's guest is Mousa Hamad. Mousa is a senior manager and leader in corporate IT and operations. He is exceptionally good at blending cutting-edge technical expertise with a truly people-first approach. He is also known for leading cost-saving procurement strategies and mentoring teams to excellence. Mousa brings both technical acumen and genuine human insight to every single challenge, including the very interesting challenge we have in store for him here today. Challenge in which we will be discussing the indiscriminate tech layoffs that we have experienced in recent times. And we so happen to have unsuspecting Mousa here to speak for all of tech leadership across the world. You would want to
I feel bad for tech leadership across the world, Newton, if I'm speaking for them, but thank you so much for having me today.
It's a pleasure having you here, Mousa. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to join us. How are you?
Doing well here on a nice weekend morning. Really excited to have our conversation. I know we had some hiccups last time, and what I love about the approach is that we adapted, we moved on, we adjusted, and so much of that applies to business and transformation as well, right? Not everything's always going to go right, and here we are having this conversation, so I'm excited.
Completely agree. That is the dynamic way of people working in the tech space. Nothing is static. Yeah. Mousa, you've had this remarkable career. I'm sure I speak for many watching this. We would want to know, what is your why? What is the driving force which has kept you motivated all this time? Yeah. And what's the mission you're on in the tech space?
Yeah, so the why actually will tie back to a little bit of my personal journey, just kind of working through challenges and the way some of my past has shown up in the present, where I emotionally react to things and wasn't always bringing my best self to my family, my professional life. And, I'm a great admirer of a guy named Jim Carrey. He's an actor, comedian, and watched a lot of his content. And there was one talk he gave specifically where he realized one day he started to achieve the level of success he wanted when he figured out his purpose. And Jim Carrey's purpose was to free people from concern. It was so that when they were watching him, they would forget about their problems. So I tried to steal his purpose.
I thought his purpose was the $10 million he wrote on a piece of paper or was it $5 million he wrote and gave himself 5 years?
Yeah, it was famously 10 million. You're right. But his purpose is what allowed him to achieve that goal. Right.
Yeah, great actor. I mean, I like his work. It's one of the best that ever did it.
Oh, yeah. Amazing. And if you ever watch any of his speeches or his content, he's just thinking on a philosophical level.
Especially now, he's gotten really deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's become an artist. He does a lot of painting, and he does a lot of speaking on mental health and people needing to rest and find themselves. To go back to that $10 million, because that is his famous anecdote. What he realized though was his purpose was to free people from concern, so that when they were watching him on stage or on screen, they would forget about their problems. So I tried to steal Jim Carrey's purpose. I said, okay, I want to free people from concern. It kind of works in tech, but not really. And it really wasn't me either, right? And so I sat back and I did a lot of reflection, and I realized that my purpose and my why is to be everybody's biggest fan. I'm a huge believer in everyone around me, because throughout my career, that humbling way that you put that remarkable journey 20 years ago, being on a help desk, to today achieving a level of vice president at a $1 billion SaaS company, I had to tap into something to kind of make that progress and progression. And along the way, I had people that believed in me. I would never have even gotten a chance in tech if somebody hadn't put a belief in me that I didn't even have in myself. And so for me, the purpose, the why, what drives me is being everybody's biggest fan and helping them achieve the best versions of themselves. And once I really tapped into that a couple of years ago, my already really solid career progression hit another level. It hit another octave. And that's kind of what led me here today and what still drives me today. And the beautiful thing about, if you really find your true inner purpose, you can apply it anywhere. It doesn't just have to be professionally. It doesn't just have to be personally. It helps me be a better father, a better partner, a better teammate, everything. And so that's the why. That's what drives me.
So that's a great response there, Mousa. And if I'm being very frank, something that really attracted me to your already illustrious profile is that term, people first. You mentioned in many places that you're people first person, which is something which it's a cornerstone of what we are going to be discussing today, because unfortunately not the same can be said for most of the big tech companies we have today and their employment practices. Mousa, on this topic of your why, it's quite difficult to please everyone, I would say. How has it been so far? You said you would you want to be everyone's fan as best as possible. Isn't
Yep.
that like a recipe for serious headache and burden, especially in corporate life? People are just so difficult to please.
Yes, and that approach doesn't resonate with everyone. You are not, by being everybody's biggest fan, you're not always going to make fans everywhere, right? But I think one of the things that gets lost in that idea and the concept of being everybody's biggest fan, there's also a really fundamental part to that, which is you tell people the truth. You tell people the truth about their capabilities. You tell people the truth about their performance. You tell people the truth about how you perceive what the level of effort and the level of tenacity that they're bringing to their role is, because you can't cheer someone on and make them the best version of themselves if you're not also helping them improve.
Mousa, if only the tech behemoths of today were people-centric, as you have just explained, that would really, really alleviate most of the sufferings tech professionals are experiencing today with the non-stop waves of tech layoffs we continue to see, right? I would like us to take a look quickly at some data coming in from the famous website layoffs.fyi. Shout out to the owner. I think his name is Roger Lee. He's done a fantastic job showing the data, tracking tech layoffs from the big companies. So in this year of 2025 alone, we have seen roughly 24,401 tech employees that have been laid off by 92 tech companies just within this year alone. And that number continues to increase. By the time anyone watching this would get to this part of the clip, that number would probably have added a good 100 or 200 headcounts to that.
If not more.
If not more, And this is nothing new. We have experienced this significant increase. It started roughly, there've always been layoff, right? Ever since there was the concept of working. But this exponential increase we observed since the COVID-19, and since then, looking at the same stats at the big companies, there is one company leading the pack, since COVID started.
Can I guess?
Amazon.
Can I guess? I was going to say, can I guess which one it is?
What was your guess going to be?
I was going to go Meta, honestly. So, okay, it's Amazon that's been leading the pack.
Interestingly, Meta is number 2.
Okay.
So at number 1, since the COVID began, we have Amazon, which has laid off 27,840 employees, right?
Wow.
Followed closely with your guess, Meta, that has laid off 24,600 employees. In third place is Intel, the chip giant. Yeah, they've laid off 16,115 people, individuals. We have Microsoft next with 14,700, followed by Tesla, then Google, and so on and so forth. This gives you an idea of this huge numbers of layoffs that we have experienced in recent times. This, in many ways, undermines the whole notion of being a qualified tech professional and getting a job in one of the famous tech companies. I just want to get your overall perspective on these layoffs, and what do you make of these large numbers?
Yeah, I think it's heartbreaking, right? We sit here and we read numbers much in the same way the folks at Amazon and Meta sit in boardrooms and look at spreadsheets. But the fact is, for every one of those individuals, there's a story, there's loss, there's fear, there's uncertainty. It was interesting. One of the numbers that you said, I think it was the one where the layoffs this year, there was like 24,000 something and one,
yes,
right?
24,401. Yes.
And one.
That's not including the layoffs from Doge, the federal government.
Goodness.
That's roughly 49,391 employees. I have that statistics in case anyone is wondering, which is also a crazy number.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So the question is, what do I make of it? Kind of is
just a general feel, because for me, I could tell you it's concerning. I'm just curious if it's also concerning for you, to be honest. Is it normal for people in management positions, or are you also concerned about this?
Well,
what do you just feel about it? Yeah.
I'm definitely, there's always a concern because I don't sit in those boardrooms making those decisions, right? At the director, senior director, and VP level, unfortunately, you're handed the orders and it's your job to go inform those 24,000 people that they're no longer going to be employed. And oh, by the way, at some point, you also might be sat down and told that you're no longer going to be employed. You said something interesting, Newton. You mentioned how layoffs have kind of been a thing since the beginning of work. But really, when we think about it, I'm not sure if I've heard him referred to, and I call him the father of the modern layoff. Jack Welch, who was the CEO of GE, was the one who kind of came up with this idea that at the end of a quarter, you can make the books look better if you just cut the bottom 10% of your workforce. So if your listeners are interested, go out and Google Jack Welch. He's not the greatest human being, because he was the one that really kind of started the trend of, we can look at these numbers, we can look at lines on a spreadsheet, and we can make cuts to make the books look good for our shareholders and our board members. Prior to that, when you talked about layoffs, a lot of them came in industries that were unionized. So there was a lot of protection for workers where you couldn't just go in and cut them, because they had band together and established that they created some safety and some collective bargaining agreements and everything that kind of prevented those things from happening. The tech industry, famously Amazon leading the charge, has done a really good job of ensuring that unions don't bleed in. They're fighting that fight in their warehouses, right? I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but there's several jurisdictions where warehouse workers for Amazon have tried to unionize, and it's been broken up and not allowed to carry forward. So really the idea of the modern tech layoff kind of was born about in the 80s and has really kind of grown exponentially. I think what I make of it is there's an irresponsibility on the part of these tech companies that when times are good, they overscale and they overpay, right? And then when times are bad, they seesaw back the other way. And for those of us that have chosen to get into technology, we're kind of at the whim of what's happening. Unfortunately now, economic climate being what it is, and also the rise of AI and the ability to automate a lot of these functions, folks are seeing more loss than gain in terms of the number of people being employed by these companies. I'd be curious if that website also lists the number of people hired. But obviously, we're going to see a massive disparity in the number hired versus the number laid off. I think it's a tragic thing. It's a thing that shows an irresponsibility on the part of the companies. And I sit here sometimes and I think, and I'm like, what's going to give, right? Like we've got all these folks that have invested their education and their career into these tech professions. What are they going to do? And
indeed,
as much as it is, one of the things, if you're good at tech, if you establish yourself in that sector, we talked about it at the top of the show, you've got to be able to pivot. You got to be able to look and say, okay, tech is not necessarily going to work for me. What can I do? And what I've recently kind of learned from conversations with people and doing a little bit of consulting and helping some companies is, in today's day and age, every company is a tech company. They all have a software stack that requires them to run and to run their business. And so for me, I've been so hyper focused on the idea that I have to work for a SaaS company. Don't ask me why. It's just the psychology that was within me. But I'm starting to realize that, accounting firms are tech companies. There's a lot of other, even small mom and pop businesses now run on a tech stack. Everybody is using technology. So putting aside the general overall ickiness of what big tech has done in terms of the layoffs, I think if any of your listeners who have been on the receiving end of that are listening and they take anything from this, it's that step back and rethink what it is you think looks like success in terms of your job, and be willing to recognize that there's other industries out there that also require technical acumen, we have to step outside the idea that we need to work for, Mark Benioff at Salesforce and be part of the Ohana, which he's shown clearly means nothing to him, right? And so there's that balance there. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's an irresponsibility. These CEOs are seeing an opportunity. It's a money grab. They want to grow. COVID led to a boom. And then when it went away, they were just able to just as easily cut those folks and put their heads down at night and sleep easy. And that's sad.
Right now, as you spoke, Mousa, you touched on so many very important points, which I would like to echo. Typically, the management, anything from mid-level management all the way just below C-suite, are not necessarily always making the strategic decisions, right? As you said, Mousa, that directive usually comes from above. And then even directors, IT directors just get sent out to deliver whatever strategy was dished out, right? Yep. And they go and they give the directives. The HR team as well get the directives. And it's just a situation of having all the responsibilities without any of the authority, Mm-hmm. I myself, having been on both sides, been an entry-level engineer, been a manager myself, so I know firsthand how that feels like. So you and I were just basically weighing in on what's going on the craze. So please feel free not to feel attacked or responsible for all of that. But again, on your profile, you mentioned this people first approach. I was waiting for you to help us understand what you meant by this people first approach and how that has helped your career so far. Many would argue that it actually hurts progress. They would want someone to go after their dreams, a little bit selfish, a little bit focused on achieving targets, not caring about percentages of people laid off and things like that. Could you, expatiate on how your people-centric approach has worked?
There's a couple. It's talking to you is always so great because one little burst of talking leads to like 3 or 4 different thoughts. So I'm going to try to make sure I get everything. But the first thing, one of the concepts that I embraced through some of my spiritual learning, we'll get a little hippie on you for a second, is this concept and idea of leadership on a me first basis. And it almost sounds counterintuitive as you kind of tilt your head and you're like, wait, what? So the idea of leadership on a me first basis is that there is a way to meaningfully look out for yourself and elevate yourself while also bringing those around you up with you. It does not have to be a zero-sum game. There are so many people in the corporate world, not just tech, in any type of corporate environment, that feel like the only way they can gain is if others around them lose. And that's simply not true. Now, for me,
teach them, Mousa, teach them.
In order to achieve that, though, there's a couple of things. You have to be willing to sacrifice a little bit. You can't have the whole pie. It's just, it would never work, right? And so that comes with a little bit of willingness to, look, like you don't need the nicest, newest car. Like when you think in terms of that zero-sum game and you're just trying to achieve and attain, you're talking about material possession and the money that drives that. It's going to be very difficult to care about the people around you when all you're focused on is your bonus check. And so, challenging people to say, hey, look, maybe you don't hit 100% of whatever your target was. Maybe you only hit 90%, but by doing that, maybe you spare somebody's job, right? And you're still making yours, but you're not getting all of it. You're bringing that person along with you. The other thing I would say on that is a lot of leaders fear the idea of empowering the people around them and helping make them better, not realizing that if they do that, it also elevates them as well. But again, Newton, this comes back to the idea that we have to be willing to sacrifice having everything. And now this is going to come across as an attack on capitalism potentially, and it is what it is. But let's call a spade a spade. How many super yachts does a CEO need? Right? How many billions of dollars does a CEO need? How much money does a shareholder need to get? There has to come an inflection point in society where we begin to at least value the human element of business a little bit more than the monetary value of business. And that's the part that I think is missing. And I think the idea achieving a piece that you have enough will allow you to lead people in a way that's kind and meaningful, but still drive good results for the business. But we are so fixated on, we've got to make this number, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And look, what I'm talking about is pie in the sky. You're not going to get private equity to change their approach today. Their job is to squeeze every dollar they can out of a business so they can turn around and sell it. And that means there's going to be layoffs, right? That means there's going to be attrition. There's going to be cuts. And it's not just cuts around people. I'm going to start ranting now. I'll try not to go too far down. But there's also, what you'll observe is a lot of changes within a business that degrades the quality of work life and then in turn personal life for the employees. They decide to cut a piece of software that may have made things more efficient. So now, a mid-tier individual contributor where something was automated before, now they're back to living in spreadsheets and doing things manually, right? Which means they have to work an extra 2 or 3 hours in order to do their job, but they're going to do it because they don't want to lose their job, right? So it's almost like this flywheel that kind of feeds itself. And it's not just about eliminating human capital. It's about eliminating resources that human capital uses. Because when companies come in to try to make those cuts to achieve certain numbers and goals and targets, they're looking at everything. I mean, man, down to the snacks, right? Down to the type of snacks and the food that get bought for the office. I kid you not. I've had these conversations where I've sat in a meeting analyzing, well, why are we spending this much on this and this much on this? And we're talking about fruit snacks and the type of drinks we buy. And so, it's a slow boat to turn. It's not going to be something that happens overnight, and it's a reflection on the things that we've emphasized and valued in our society and our culture today. And unfortunately, it's everything but people.
Indeed. Mousa, have you ever had to compromise your relationship or friendship with people around you just so that you could meet some business targets that was set by the strategic decision makers in the company?
So one of the luxuries that I've had is I've lived my entire career in the back office, right? When I say back office, I'm talking like IT, procurement. I'm talking about teams within companies that are already viewed as overhead. So I came born about my real jump start to my IT career was at a law firm. And at the law firm, I built really good relationships with partners, and I like to think I did a pretty good job at my job. But one of the jokes that would carry on between myself and the partners would be they'd see me in the hall and they'd say, "Hey, overhead, what's up?" Right? Because that's how they would view me. I'm just overhead. As a result of that, I was kind of honed and sharpened to recognize that whatever team I was a part of, expenses always needed to be kept down and we always needed to be efficient. And so when we think about a scenario where I've been at a company, and again, we won't name names or do anything, but where layoffs have happened, when those layoffs came about, I had already been out ahead of it and reorged my team in such a way to genuinely, not just looking at lines on a spreadsheet, but genuinely manage out the people that were not contributing to the team and reorganizing the team in a way that made it as lean as possible while also still continuing to serve the business. Now, the challenge there is that if you have high performers, we'll use an IT team as a prime example, right? IT people love doing new things, rolling out new tech, checking out new tech, right? All this stuff. When you reorg yourself in such a way that you're kind of running on a bare bones team where you've got a lot of cross functionality, where you might have a system administrator who also has to spend 20% of their time in tickets, you're hurting morale in a different way. But the way you sell it is, look, we've built this team to withstand the need for layoffs because there's no meat left on this bone. And so I think for a lot of managers, now I'm going to shift this a little bit. Let's say I came to you and I said, Newton, you get $250,000 in additional salary this year. Go out and hire and do what you want. What are you going to do? You're going to go out, not you specifically, but maybe someone is going to go out and be like, sweet, I'm going to go get myself 2 or 3 head count. We're going to do this, and this. But nobody ever stops to ask themselves, maybe now this is a thought that I'm just now organically coming up with, but maybe some of the irresponsibility in that middle tier of management from that senior manager, director to VP up is to say, why do I need this? Maybe I don't need to grow this team. Hey, we're actually doing okay. Keep this money. Let us keep running the way we are. Now, if the business is going to come and say, we need to add, we need to work on additional features or we need to do additional things. Okay, I'm going to go out and do that. But before I do, I'm going to ask myself the question, can I achieve the goal with what I have? Is there a way to think about how my team interacts and works that could still get the business the outcome without growing out over my skis, when I know in the back of my mind that 250 that they gave me can just as easily be clawed back and taken away? And then I'm left holding the bag of having to tell folks that they no longer have a job.
And the sad part here, Mousa, is these layoffs, in the grander scheme of things, it undermines formal education. In a way, it's like a nail in the coffin for everything that people have believed about education. Go to school, study first principles for things, do your homework, all that stuff that people do in universities, in school, to get the qualifications, to get the degrees. They perform most of those activities under some form of threat of being expelled. They've got to be disciplined to do the work to get the degrees, right? Mm-hmm. And because of that, they sacrifice a whole lot of what people would call experiencing life, enjoying the pleasures of life. They tell themselves that I just have to get through this formal education. It's difficult now. While my mates are out there in the sunshine playing, while people are going to the clubs, let me put my head down, study for 4 years, 8 years, take loan from the bank, do whatever I have to do to get my formal education. Once I get a job, it comes with job security. Then I can relax some bit. However, the way these companies now are laying people off at a whim, indiscriminately for the most part. I could give countless examples where employers go home on a Friday, come back on Monday, they're unable to log in. Their badges do not work in the gate, right? Or sometimes on the main office door, and they're unable to get in, and that's how they discover that they've been laid off, right? Majority of them just got a simple email, thank you for your service, but unfortunately, we can't continue with you. Some of them get some good severance packages, some do not, right? Now, this cannot be compared to expulsion that happened during school days. Layoffs for adults, it's a different matter. These are people who, some of them have, built families, they've got multiple mouths to feed, parents as well to take care of, and things like that. If you're telling them that the whole fear they had when they were young growing up as a youth and sacrificed everything has to continue into adulthood, right? Now with the whole certificates and everything, they have to spend the next 3 decades being afraid of people at the place they work for. There's potential they might be laid off. Exactly. They might be laid off at any time, right? Not having that job security, which is the most important thing. This alone is the nail in the coffin to discourage anyone from studying formal education, which I personally think has its own merit, has its own utility, and should not be shoved away, not this early, right? AI is already doing a good job in letting people know that they can go be an entrepreneur and they do not need to go that route. But the indiscriminate layoffs, these CEOs should know that they are the ones putting the nail in the coffin and say, you've been on a fool's errand all along.
So two things that stood out on that. The first is we talk about that people first mindset. Sometimes being people first isn't saving people's jobs, but at least respectfully informing them and allowing them to leave their jobs. And we have done a really poor job of that, particularly in the tech industry, with these sweeping emails that we send and we say, okay, there's gonna be layoffs on Monday. You'll know when your stuff doesn't work, kind of thing, right? That's a joke. That's just a complete lack of regard and respect for people. The second point you brought up is a really interesting one. So I'm first generation Palestinian American. My family is all from the West Bank. And my mom and my grandma wanted nothing more for me than to go get my college degree. Newton, I was a horrible student, like a horrible student. They politely asked me not to come back after my first year of college because I just didn't like school and I didn't like classes. And so for me, I hear that and I say that these things now are an opportunity for people to recognize and understand that the traditional route doesn't have to be the only one. The things that served me well and helped me achieve the level of success I achieved and climbing the corporate ladder today, the biggest thing was actually waiting tables, believe it or not. The idea of being in the service industry, being able to anticipate needs, be overwhelmed, all of these things that I think a lot of people, when they're sitting and just studying books, don't necessarily get. And so I would encourage your listeners to consider that there are multiple paths to success. I would also encourage people, you brought up a really good point, man. And we're talking tech, but we're getting really philosophical here because it's the idea that, we're put into school, we're taught how to learn, we're taught how to study, and we're told, okay, if you can just achieve this thing and finish primary, pre-primary, and then you finish primary, and then after that you can get your job, and then once you get your job everything's fine. But once you're in that job, you need a certain title and you got to save a certain amount, and you wake up one day and you're in your mid 60s or early 70s, and what have you done? You've been on that same kind of hamster wheel the whole time, doing something for other people in hopes of achieving something for yourself that was maybe never really attainable. And so I think for a lot of people, we need to rethink this idea of what success looks like, because we do, it goes back to the CEOs wanting the super yachts or the mega yachts. You and I in this middle level are no different. We want to be, I love telling people I'm vice president of blah, blah, blah. It feels good, right? But what is it really? You know what I mean? And so I think there needs to be a rethinking again, like I said earlier, where people that have gone into tech, I would invite them to consider rethinking what a tech job looks like. I would also invite your listeners to consider what success in life looks like, right? And that maybe you don't need to climb that corporate ladder and do that type of stuff to achieve success. Now, man, it's drilled in us. It's trained in us. We're taught from a very early age, especially being a child of immigrants, like success looks like a certain thing, right? And and that's that's wired into our DNA. That's not just something that we're taught. I mean, it's what we're born into. It's what the system teaches us. And I don't want to sit here and talk about the system like I'm a conspiracy theorist or something, but it is what it is, right?
Fortunately, it's not all bad. What we were taught growing up, same thing, immigrant parents, myself. I mean, there's a middle ground there. It's not all bad. Again, having that formal education, it has some merits, right? For instance, if I am having heart problems, I would want to be analyzed by a cardiologist, right? That has spent all their life from childhood studying about hearts, the way the heart works, for years, right? Decades, preferably via university, getting the qualifications. And then I would prefer such a person to look at me rather than a doctor who has studied everything from the brain, bones and other types of medicine and pharmaceutical disciplines. I would prefer depth in knowledge, in education, as opposed to breadth, which has been encouraged by what's happening today, where people that have been working for decades as a database administrator, for instance, have been laid off for no reason whatsoever and been told, hey, it's a time of AI, there are multiple jobs you could start, go become a UI UX designer. Hello.
Let me ask you something. You brought up a really good point. You said, you want your heart looked at by a seasoned, well-studied, well-read cardiologist. Do you want your software developed by a seasoned, well-read, well-educated developer? Or are you cool with the individual that's kind of taught themselves and figured it out?
That's a very good rhetoric question. Of course I would want the best,
Right. And the best may be that latter individual. And so I think that's one of the things that maybe we've missed, and people put such an overinvestment in having to go get those credentials to prove that they can do a job versus just going out and doing the job. And I've been talking to somebody recently, a friend of mine. We've talked about the tech layoffs, and when we think about which teams are really being decimated the most within technology, right? It's low to mid-level engineers. It's a lot of customer success, right? It's a lot of product managers, technical writers. I see a lot of product managers out on LinkedIn saying that they're struggling to find work. There are these certain functions within technology. This is a stretch of a tie-in, and this is the first time I've publicly kind of talked about this. So bear with me, and I'll see how it lands. But it's almost like you're familiar with the concept of the blue collar worker and the white collar worker, right?
Yep.
It's almost like in tech now, amongst these 24,401 people that you talked about that got laid off, there's this concept that exists of a gray collar worker. Okay. They're not given latitude to do the things that they want. They're not given latitude to free think. All they're doing is a repeatable process that somebody else has outlined for them. And when you fall into that category of being a gray collar worker, your job is at risk every day. Because when it's something that's repeatable and easily done, at some point, not to get all apocalyptic on your listeners, the machines are coming for you. Right? And so if you're in now, if there's somebody out there that's listening that's 16, 17, 18 years old and you're thinking about going to university, okay? Think about what it is you're going to study and what the output is going to be at the end. And if the output from going to university for 4 years or 6 years or whatever is going to be that you're going to settle into this gray collar type work, I would rethink what you're doing. Because at some point, you're going to be susceptible. You're going to be one of those lines on a spreadsheet that's going to be very easy to cut because you don't add value to the business. Salespeople aren't cut as much, are they? Right? Yeah, some sales departments are cut, but companies are always going to invest in sales and marketing because that's going to drive revenue. You know what I'm saying? And you got to think about these things. A human will, I shouldn't say never. I don't like speaking in absolutes. I don't believe that in my lifetime, a human being is going to be comfortable making a meaningful software purchase from AI. Right? They're always going to want that human touch to that. Even if the AI could do it better, they're still going to want that human touch. There's something psychologically there, okay? But there are a lot of functions within business. Think about implementation of software, implementation departments. I mean, what are they doing? It's the same steps and the same process over and over and over again, right? Customer success, checking in with customers, product management. Look at all these things. They're all repeatable processes. And so there is this massive subset of workers within the tech industry that are that gray collar worker. They're not empowered. They go to university. What I've come to understand is you go to university to develop the ability to think and to build your network, right? If you've really gone to school right, you're learning to ask questions and to challenge the status quo. So I'll tell you right now, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't want you challenging his status quo. He's very happy with the status quo, right? Don't get it twisted. That man is doing just fine. And so we gotta rethink what it is we want out of our careers and out of our lives, and the investment that we're going to make up front to achieve it. If you want to fall into one of those gray collar roles, that's great. I would just tell you that there's other avenues versus having to take out massive student loans and going to university to get there. And by the way, I'm a prime example. I lived the gray collar life, right? Help desk tech, service desk. This is Mousa. How may I help you? Oh, you need a password reset? Okay. Right? That's all that was. Now, how did I differentiate myself? Let's tie it back to go from being a tier 1 help desk tech in 2008 to a vice president of corporate IT and procurement in 2024, 2025. It was the human element. What I learned very early on is that people can get support from anywhere. But if you can build a human connection, I tell this to all every time I start somewhere, I hire someone, I say, as a tech, you can be prickly, right? You can be very direct and very blunt, that stereotypical tech person, but you better be really good at your job, because people are going to have a very low tolerance for your personality if you can't fix their stuff quick. I'll tell you right now, I was a mediocre tech at best. I was always the guy that was asking people around me, hey, I got this problem, how do I do this? But what I did was I built a relationship with the user that I supported so that I got the grace from them to figure out their problem. And a lot of people would end up wanting to come to me for help over somebody that can fix their problem right away, because that person also was condescending towards them. And so you want to talk about how you differentiate yourself, how you think about safeguarding your career as much as possible. If you choose to enter the machine of big tech, you have to set yourself apart in a way, because there's going to be a lot of these types of roles that are going to show up as line items on a spreadsheet. How do you set yourself apart and do those types of things? And that's the challenge. But this idea of the gray collar worker in tech, those 24,000, that's who they are. I mean, I don't know if that website shows the titles, but I guarantee you the majority of them are not the architects, right? System architects are not going to be on that yet. Who knows if we'll get there or not, right? But I bet you there's a cross section where I would venture to guess over 50% of them probably fit within 5 or 6 roles.
Mousa, how long did it take you in years from that entry-level help desk role to when you got to, let's say, the first managerial role that mattered? You said 2008. So in total, I'm looking at 16 years ago was probably when you got into the help desk thing. But when did you, let's say, make this transition to your first managerial role and decided you were not going back from managerial roles?
So I started, really 2007 would have been my first like entry-level IT job. I worked at a car dealership, interestingly enough, because somebody took a chance on me and said, hey, we need tech help. We think you can do it. It's actually an ex-father-in-law. Yeah. So this is a cool story. This is the Mousa tech origin story. So 2007, 2008, I was engaged and then married to a young woman. And I didn't have a job. No degree, didn't know what I was doing, but I could type really fast. So I'd gotten a lot of data entry work. And one day I would always fix her dad's computer. And I would just Google stuff, Newton. I didn't know what I was doing. I would just put in the error code and work through and figure it out, right? And one day he looks at me and says, hey, you should come be the IT guy at the car dealership. He was the CFO. And I remember this conversation like it was yesterday. I said to him, I don't know the first thing about computers. And he said, fake it. And I said, all right, let's go. And I show up on day one and he points me to this rat's nest of a network closet. He hands me a clipboard. He says, clean this up and do inventory. I said, let's go. So I did that. Cool. And then that was in Tennessee, relocated to Seattle, found a job again as a support analyst, help desk, tier 1 at a small little company. Was there about a year and then got an opportunity to move to a fairly large law firm in the Seattle area as a help desk tech once again. And so I did that for nearly 5 years. In that time, I kind of transitioned and I became a lead at one point. So I always knew I loved building teams and I'm just always fascinated by the idea of team dynamics. And so I was able to work myself into a help desk lead role.
Was it specifically technical team? So you just...
Yes. Oh no.
I just loved working with people.
Yeah, didn't matter. And so at the law firm, I also was a part of a team that started supporting the lawyers at trial and in arbitrations and stuff. And then ended up, this is kind of crazy. I ended up working a case for Paul Allen's family office. Paul Allen, who co-founded Microsoft with Bill Gates. Yeah. That actually led to a role being one of 4 individuals who was direct IT support to Paul Allen, which entailed traveling with him a week a month, being on call 24/7 and just taking care of his needs. And Newton, when I say taking care of his needs, I mean everything from making sure his phone was charged to making sure he had the movies he wanted to watch on the plane, to making sure that the internet on the G6 worked when we were flying over the Atlantic Ocean, kind of thing. Now, there was a team of many people behind us that supported us from the ground and did everything. Fun fact, Paul Allen used, one of his favorite devices was the BlackBerry Torch. And he used it well into, I presume until he passed away, because he liked that it had a battery that could be swapped out, so that he never had to plug it in. We just always had to be carrying our batteries with us. So but that was a very high demand, high stress, high travel job. And I realized I didn't want to do that anymore. And so I put in my notice and I quit that. And I at that point was kind of at an inflection point in my career where I said, okay, I'm either going to become a deeply knowledgeable individual contributor in one area, or I'm going to go into tech leadership. And my heart took me towards the leadership. So I found this little, not so little, consulting company in Bellevue, Washington, that had up until that point been using a managed service provider to run all their IT needs. And they finally realized that in order to scale, they were at 300 employees. They needed to bring IT in-house. So I tell people, they took a chance on me because they saw something in me. I took a chance on them, and the outcome was mutually beneficial. They were able to find a talented individual who could run and build their IT department at a fraction of the cost because he'd never done it before. And I was able to convince a company to give me that first manager title, right, to be able to go and do that. And so I was there for almost 18 months. We scaled from 300 to 700 employees and grew the IT department and did all the things that you need, right? Putting it in ticketing systems, creating documentation, knowledge bases, all that good stuff. And that was it. When I fell into that, I realized that the management and the leadership of people was really what I loved. And I also realized that it didn't matter what capacity, like what function you were leading, right? So like, as I was there, I also, and this is something that I think for a lot of your IT leaders that are listening, you inherit for some reason, oftentimes in small to mid-sized companies, you inherit site operations or facilities as well. And I realized that the concepts are the same. It's all about supporting the customer. And so that was my big break into management. And then from there, I left and was given went from manager to senior manager at a software company, was promoted to director there, doing IT and the site operations, the facilities. And then I had another company called Ziff Davis, which your listeners may or may not have heard of, but if they've ever done an Ookla speed test, Ookla is one of their subsidiaries. PC Mag, IGN, CNET, all those brands belong to Ziff Davis. And they brought me in, got me completely out of IT. I was solely just doing procurement. The idea of centralizing the procurement function and renegotiating contracts for economies of scale and this and that. And then PushPay called me back and went back there because they'd done an acquisition and needed some help kind of combining IT systems and bringing teams together. And did that for nearly 3 years. And then just recently I put in my notice. My last days there were actually in January, and now I'm doing a little bit of freelancing. But I also have actually just accepted a role that I'll be starting next week, which I'm excited about as well. And I wasn't going to talk about it, but I've decided that I will, because I think it's going to resonate with a point I made earlier. This particular company that I'm joining, called Howard Financial, is a business process company that does accounting as a third party for companies. And so here I am, getting my start in tech, recognizing that the tech industry is just being decimated, but there are other industries and services that are still thriving in today's economic climate. And guess what? They need business processes. They need software to run their businesses. And it becomes all the same thing. And now when you think about a financial firm that does outsourced finance and accounting work, they're always going to be a necessity, right? And oftentimes companies may even cut their internal teams to use a company like this. And I think now, as I told this narrative, when we talk about the layoffs and everything that's happening, this is where I would invite your listeners to consider, it doesn't have to be a tech company in order for you to work in tech. And so that's kind of where I arrived and landed. But you hear that progression and it's wild. When I sit here and I say it, tier 1 help desk tech to vice president of operations, right? The biggest advice I would give to people, and I feel like I'm rambling, but I'll wrap this up here.
Very solid points. Every single thing you've mentioned so far.
Okay, yeah.
Please don't leave anything out.
Here's the biggest bit of advice I would say is, I got where I got by always being willing to be the one to take on the problem. The challenges in a business that nobody wants to take on, I would always raise my hand for. I would always take it on. Nobody wants to run site operations, right? Nobody wants to run procurement. That's not sexy work. But here's the thing about those functions. They still require business acumen. They still require a use of technology. They still require a building of teams, and they still require running a budget, right? I mean, my last company, I ran $4 million worth of construction projects. And I say I had an amazing team of individuals that really did the work. I was just able to create the space for them to do so. But like a $4 million budget is a $4 million budget. Doesn't matter whether it's software contracts or construction contracts, right? You still have to have a level of acumen. And so, you know, not having taken the traditional educational route, not having a degree that says that I have to do this thing, actually enabled me to take on everything and anything that was thrown at me, and allowed me to build this career that, you know, was not half bad and still going.
Yeah, Mousa, your entire career journey is just a testament to what's possible in the tech space. There's so many takeaways at every step of the way, you know, and one big takeaway I find very interesting and I would like to echo is the importance of connections. For you, it was like that springboard, because on this podcast, which is typically focused on careers for tech professionals, the challenge is usually at the beginning there, you know, what needs to happen to flip the tides in your favor. You know, It was the networking, the connections, who you know that mattered. I don't want to call it nepotism at this point, but you know, your wife's, was it her father? So you had an in-law who was the very,
100%.
very first contact with tech. Out of the blue, they invited you and say, hey, would you want to give this a shot? Now, I admit not many people would have that chance in life, but if it does present itself,
Never say no.
Exactly. And
Never
also,
say no.
you know, just being in the environment matters a lot. Proximity you had, and in my opinion, I think your proximity to greatness, Paul Allen, also played a significant part. When you got what you said was the first managerial role, and they took a chance on you. I don't think it was a chance. This is someone who spent 5 years close to greatness. You know, having that on your CV alone, who would
that's a really good point.
CV under the table?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, so that's something I just want to echo to the listeners. You know, starting out is the most important part. Might not be where you're going to end up or what you enjoy doing, but just being in proximity to people that are doing the stuff, that are killing it, or just the technology itself alone. All of that adds up. And I can even speak. My story is not that different. Starting out in things I didn't like, but eventually getting promoted and getting into things I liked. I was able to choose. Yeah. So that's a very, very important piece of advice. Yeah,
The path is not linear. And if you think you have it mapped out, you're going to be sorely disappointed. So be ready to pivot and deviate. You know, I'll add one more thing. You know, you talked about.
You can add two more things. Okay. It's a career podcast.
You know, this next role that I'm going to be taking on came about.
What's the title? Is it a secret?
Vice President of Operations at a company called Howard Financial. Yep.
Okay.
When I left PushPay and I was like, all right, I'm just going to network. I'm going to meet with people. I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to be selective about the next thing I do. I was willing to talk to anyone and everyone. And so interestingly enough, I had built a pretty good connection with a former CSM who managed my account for a SaaS software that we used at PushPay. And he and I met. And this is wild. And this is why I would encourage your listeners, talk to everyone, okay? Because this gentleman, his name is Greg. He's got a bottle of whiskey coming his way for facilitating an intro. But he's a part of this WhatsApp community. And he said, hey, man, just give me a short blurb. Give me your resume. I'll toss it in there. And, you know, a lot of times people are looking for help, whether it be consulting or otherwise. And that's how I got this job. That's how these individuals found me and the conversation started. And so really, you know, we're talking about those 24,401 individuals that have been laid off this year. And if they're listening up to this point, I would tell them, take every conversation. You never know what events are going to transpire to help you land your next role that might be your dream role, right? Or even just get you a contract that helps you get by while you're finding your dream role. And so like you can't dismiss anyone, and good value comes from everyone. And so just have those conversations, meet with people, talk with people, because you see it if you're scrolling on LinkedIn, like many of us do from time to time, the horror stories about I've applied to 1,000 jobs in the last year and I barely hear back from anyone. That's not how we find jobs anymore. Jobs are found on a human connection basis. They're found on a referral basis. People want to talk to people that are known, and they want to talk to somebody that they have a connection with, even if it's via a second or third party.
I think that's the most powerful piece of advice we could get on this particular show, particularly in this time with the layoffs that's happening. If there is a possibility or a way that these companies could be made more accountable for their actions, I feel, as you rightly use the word, there's some degree of irresponsibility going on, right? I've been thinking about this for quite some time, because some of the people I speak to, there are people that have been laid off, some of them looking for career guidance, some looking for direction, some just asking that question, is the whole tech dream, the way you have other dreams like the American dream, is a tech dream a complete fallacy at this point? So, I mean, thinking about just weighing in on how these companies can be made more responsible with their actions, because it's just crazy if you look at the reasons for most of these layoffs. Most of them, they are not justified, right? They come up with things like the company is experiencing this decline, they're losing money, and as you rightly said, they need to cut off some percentage of people so they can have a better financial projections for the next period to come. Most of that, and I have data, most of that has been proven untrue, Mousa. Microsoft laid off 1,900 workers just days before reporting a 17.6% increase in revenue to $62 billion, right? Amazon dismissed 1,000 workers despite a 14% rise in revenue to $170 billion. Google is not better off either. Announced cutoff of 12,000 workers despite a 1% year-on-year revenue growth for the quarter end of December. And Canva, this one I found interesting. Canva, they let go of roughly just 10 to 12 technical writers. But this is interesting, approximately 9 months after telling its employees to use generative AI tools wherever possible. So there's something happening behind the scenes. These companies are not necessarily just letting go employees. They are restructuring. They are hiring for other skill sets, right? We cannot ignore the elephant in the room, AI. Everyone is kind of looking for an AI researcher today to some extent, or an AI consultant. So the nature of the hiring is changing. Now, I would like you and I just to explore. I know there are some regulatory bodies in existence. There are more of them in the EU than over there in America that actually protect the interest of employees. But unfortunately, these are not being enforced, right? There are many employees still waiting for severance months to years after they were indiscriminately laid off, right? I was thinking, what do you think about this possibility of, let's say, the same way we have job boards where companies have to post openings, and they're very proud to always do that. Oh, we have 100 job openings. Come and join us. We are the best, so on and so forth. As we have these job boards, Indeed, Glassdoor, over there in the US, I think Robert Half is quite popular.
Yep.
There should be probably a similar board, but then for announcing the people laid off and the reasons for them being laid off. Yep. This should, I think, help with transparency.
Yep.
And to add to that, not just publishing the layoffs and people laid off and why they were laid off, but for majority of the cases, there should also be names tagged to these layoffs. Because in the way you described it nicely, Mousa, some of these layoffs were made because proper foresight and thinking wasn't given to the future, right? They just felt the boom, surge in technological activities during the COVID session, and someone made the decision that, hey, let's hire 20% more people without thought of the dynamic nature of the environment. So most of these layoffs can be traced to one individual. I've seen this happen in the past. They hire a new director to go change things, and the directors make these strategic decisions which can be traced down to the exact day, hour, minute they made that decision. So I'm thinking there should be this transparency board, as well as attaching the names of actual individuals who made those decisions. And they should be held responsible. Maybe, they should feel the brunt of this heat. Lose the job, get a salary cut off, or things like that, whatever that should be. This has so many advantages. Not only does it help to protect the company itself, right? Because it's either that individual who took the strategic decision takes the blame, or the entire brand of a company gets dragged into the mud. Reputations built for years gets completely destroyed as not being a people-centric organization. But having this level of transparency would get these people in the strategic making decision layer to think well next time before jumping around and hiring people that they will later on shoo out to the streets like cattle, right? What do you think about this board? And do you have some other drastic?
I think you're more.
solutions?
I think you're more idealistic than I am. That would be
Wishful
really
thinking,
nice.
I know.
Yeah, and so, but it goes back and ties back to the thing that the example that I gave about the manager being handed $250,000 in salary and being told to go hire, right? Yes, you're 100% right. In a perfect world, we would have that level of transparency to say this was the decision that was made at this time, and then the company had to walk it back because of this, and this is why all these people have been laid off, because of these two individuals that made these choices. It's hard. I mean, the thing is, I have this phrase that I say, it's never one thing. And so I think when you come to the idea of, a massive layoff happening, it's very difficult to pinpoint one moment, one individual, and one decision that led to that. A lot of great athletes at the elite level, if they make a really bad play that costs their team the game, right? The teammates around them will always say, well, there was, 59 other minutes, or there was 89 other minutes. I'll do it for soccer for your audience's benefit. There was 89 other minutes in that game that also contributed to the outcome. And so I think while it's idealistic, yes, also, a great thought and a great concept, I worry that we would then hinge these outcomes on one individual in one moment, when that's never going to be the case. It's never just one thing. And so I would while there's a part of me that loves that idea and that concept, having sat on both sides of it, right? Being the worker and being the one doing the hard decisions and making the cuts or whatever. I would hate for accountability to fall on one individual for environmental factors that are outside their control.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point there. It's just that whole decision would hinge on what is out of, or what was out of their control, right?
Right.
That's ultimately what it would come down to, and I agree it could be a gray, messy area, but I don't see that even happening enough. That discussion happening, because you're right, it's difficult to pin that to one particular person. But there are indeed cases where it's just a human being who made the wrong decision, made the wrong call at a particular time. That's also happening. At least what people would like to see is that argument, that debate happening, that, hey, this person is trying to defend his decision at some point, which led to the layoff of 300 fathers who have 10 kids that were laid out on the street. Things like that. We need to see some accountability, some discussions being held. Why do I personally think this is important? Because yes, maybe all these decision-making mid-level managers like us may be vindicated following this debate, but at least it would show that these are not roles that you just come in and make decisions on a whim. Right? It would send the message out clearly to people that if you are hired into a job, and a lot, I can tell you just between you and I without anyone listening, there are a lot of AI consultants being hired today to go and cut out staff, right? This whole Doge concept is not just in the US alone. Many
Right.
companies have their own name. They call it different names. It could be Doge, it could be something else. Go in there, cut slash 50% of the staff.
Yep.
So I just feel, some way for this responsibility to be enforced, for companies to be made a little bit more responsible. They should feel this sense of social and moral responsibility
Pressure and
to the people
responsibility.
around.
Yeah. You know what? There is one individual actually that should always be held accountable, and that's the individual at the top. At the end of the day, the Elon Musks, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Benioffs, all these individuals, everything that happens within the company falls on them. And so I think we as a society would probably view some of this a little differently if, instead of giving us fluff and saying we cut them because they were poor performers or this or that or the other, just stand up and say what it is, right? Call it what it is. We grew too big. We had too many people on the payroll and we needed to cut them, right? Because the other thing it does is when you start saying, I've read a lot of posts about this too, when people that have been laid off from Meta, and Meta is out publicly saying we laid off our poor performers, and then you see somebody that just got laid off, they are now stigmatized and labeled as a poor performer. No, Mark, you ran a business that made a decision to do this. Don't dump on this person because you ran your business poorly and ended up having to do this. The fact is, you grew too fast. You didn't forecast well. The revenues weren't what you promised to your shareholders, and now you're having to cut. Call a spade a spade. I think that we don't even need to name that VP or that senior VP or the director that made that one decision in a moment. It starts at the top. And I think we would all feel a little better about what's happening in the world today in tech and these layoffs and everything if somebody would just accept accountability. And because that's what you're ultimately talking about, right? Is accountability. And attitude reflects leadership, and it starts at the top.
In a way, I agree for the most part with your point of view, but I also differ just a little bit in that response. That's the part that I feel, most of these leaders of these companies, they have been taking accountability for the most part. Like Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg came up this famous clip on YouTube all over the place where he apologized for the layoffs, and he clearly said that no one else within Meta should be blamed. This letting go of staff was a strategic decision and he owns that, blah, blah. The big names, Elon Musk and the others, they're by not putting forth anybody, they're taking the blames. But all I was trying to explore, underneath the ownership level, they're also guilty middle level people.
Sure.
That's just the point of people that are getting hired for their ability to think critically and lead the company in strategic decisions. That includes roles which you and I might have had, including VP roles, IT managers, making strategic decisions. Sometimes it really does come down to a subset of people. I know it's also going to paint a company in bad light if you put one person's name out there. This person made that decision that led to the layoff of 1,000 people, blah, blah, blah. It's also that negative connotation, but sometimes it's just that they hired someone who wasn't competent enough. Why is one incompetent person not being portrayed as such? Instead, you would rather portray 1,000 competent people as being incompetent.
Yeah.
That's just, there's a nuance there, but I just want to emphasize that middle level strategic decision makers are not being held accountable enough. And I think they should be. I honestly think they should be, because you get a lot of those people today. Some of them have not worked in the industries they're applying for. They're managers all their life. They've been working on something completely abstract. For instance, they've been tourist guide and things like that. Then you bring them in to manage a specific sector of an industry that has had people working for decades, and to make calls, cutting out people based on what they have done for the past week. Right? There's this funny thing of making them, show what they've been working on, and then you assess that week by week, trying to make sense of what's going on, and you end up firing people and making mistakes. When Doge started doing that, I knew they would make mistakes, and they have admitted that they are making mistakes as well. You don't bring outsiders and just do things at a whim. You get a lot of things right, but some things wrong as well. So there is that gray area which can be further explored, probably on some other call when we have more time.
Yeah.
But again, as you and I are responsibility holders, I'm sure we would say anything to protect ourselves and our positions. And I mean, I'm happy to defend myself if it comes to that as a middle level manager. If the blame, some hands are pointed at me for making a decision and it came from above, then I would show my cards and say, look, I had to make this call on so and so day at this time because this was my reasoning.
Right.
And that blame goes to the owner. Really as simple as that. I'm not asking anyone to be crucified, but just too many middle management people being brought into roles they have no idea and they make these calls. I can speak about how bad a decision it is to bring in managers to make decisions in such a short time. There are things that have happened in a company. It's really hard to really explain to a newcomer why things are the way they are. You need to have been working there for a long time. You need to have experienced periods of critical outages and see how the system is being brought back up and some other things that you cannot just gather overnight. Yeah.
Right.
So it's still a thought. I'm still thinking about it. It's really, I don't see this being talked about anywhere, but I'm just thinking, drastic times call for drastic measures.
I think the answer probably lies somewhere in the middle, right? It's a really good point. It goes back to, it's never one thing. It's not solely on the CEO and it's not solely on the individuals that are carrying out the marching orders. And it's a hard area to live in. It's a difficult thing. And I think, ultimately it's what we're all looking for is accountability. People's lives have been impacted in very meaningful and difficult ways. And when you're in that boat, you just want to be able to understand the why. And I think that's what's missing. And what we don't want to hear is just it's budget or it's this or it's that. There's always there's more. There's more that went into that decision being made. There's more that contributed to the need to make that decision. And I think that's kind of what we're all after.
Mousa, as we wind to a close with this episode, just looking back at your career, I'm trying to juxtapose your engineering days to the managerial and directorial positions you had. If there was one skill set you lacked while you were an engineer in the tech space, which turned out to be, I would say, probably the most valuable in your managerial role, what would that skill set be?
A skill that I lacked earlier in my career that became valuable later? Is that what you're asking?
In the managerial role. Yeah, let's say there are some engineers looking to transition from working as, an engineer into leading teams and managing teams. Would there be some skill set you would probably point them to go amplify?
I see. I understand.
Yeah.
Empathy. it's not necessarily a skill. I know that might be a cop out, but I think a lot of folks, learning the idea and concept how to meet people where they are. When you become a leader of people, your job is to try to achieve the greatest level of accurate output from those individuals. You want the best work from them, and the skill that is required is a soft skill. It's the ability to step back and say, man, Newton's code has had a lot of issues this last couple of weeks. He's really underperforming. I'm gonna have to talk to him, right? Or we flip that and we say, Newton's code has really struggled this last couple of weeks. What's going on with Newton? What's happening that's causing this? Because he didn't have these issues before. And I think if I were to point to one thing, when I was a high performer early in my career, I didn't consider that as it related to the people around me when they went into their slumps and weren't doing as well. And by the way, I had those moments too. But of course, we don't see ourselves the same way we see other people's faults. And so that would be it. It's a soft skill. It's a hard one. I don't know if there's courses out there on empathy and how to learn it.
I bet you there are.
Probably, yeah, probably. You're
On
probably
YouTube,
right.
probably.
Yeah, YouTube. There's a masterclass somewhere, but I really think that's it. I think that is the biggest thing. You make massive fans and individuals that will work really hard to contribute to the goals that you've set for the team. If you're able to be empathetic to them and recognize that they're human and that they're not always going to be 100% perfect.
Yeah. Very solid, very profound advice. That's another powerful gem. Also, in the spirit of bringing this full circle, just looking at the people that have been impacted by these layoffs, in their thousands, people laid off from the tech space, and maybe people at the brink of being laid off, unknown to them. They are just, a few days away. Since this episode was running, I'm sure many people have received their letters, the fork in the road letters, it's called. You've given some solid advice throughout the course of this episode, how they could prepare themselves for such things, being having this malleable approach, being flexible, to pivot and change careers. Also, have this empathy along the way. I just wanted to see if there's anything else you wanted to add, even if it's just a reassurance, like your last few words.
Always say yes. Say yes to the conversation. Say yes to the challenge you're presented at work. And good things will happen. Nothing good happens if you sit doing nothing.
Yep, another good point. Final question, just a ritual on this episode. If there is a biggest mistake you've made along your career journey, something significant that you would like to forewarn anyone watching this, what would that mistake and what was the lesson you learned from it?
Man, yeah. I don't know if this is going to seem like a cop out, but early in my career, I was, overall, I talked about doing really well, supporting individuals and being good customer service. I was not always the kindest person to my teammates. And I would say that would be my biggest advice.
Slow down.
Yeah, slow down. See your teammates for who they are. Recognize that everybody brings value, and that you putting them down doesn't elevate you anymore. And because I did quite a bit of that early in my career.
Well said. Thank you so much, Mousa, for choosing and accepting to come on the podcast today. Where can anyone who's searching find you online?
Yeah, right. Just LinkedIn. Mousa Hamad, the name I'm sure will be in the description and everything. Feel free to reach out, send me a message. Always love to chat, have a good conversation. Giving people advice on their careers, just talking about their career is like a huge passion of mine. So if anybody ever wants to chat or anything, if you've been subjected to a layoff and you just want to talk to somebody, I'm always here and always willing to lend a hand and an ear.
On that note, we bring this episode to an end. Thank you everyone for watching till the very end, and we say thank you to Mousa as well for hanging in till the very end. It wasn't the easiest of conversation, as we had to speak for the rest of the poor, irresponsible, indiscriminate
tech oligarchy
made by a lot of exactly.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'll be happy to have you back at any time in the future. If you have some more to add, some maybe new lessons learned, some changes in your career, we'll be more than happy to have you back.
Give me a few months. I'll come back and talk to you about what the shift away from a traditional tech company has looked like, and maybe be able to give your audience a little bit of insight on that.
Yeah, we can hardly wait.
I love it.
Until the next episode, cheers.